tuned in to the cold, hard truth. Cayman's #1 hard-hitting live podcast show, where we feature some straightforward conversations on political, social, and celebrity news and all things happening in the Cayman Islands and around the world. This show was created to give the people a voice and a means of being involved and informed without any filters. Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. We bring you the tea, piping hot, so grab your favorite beverage and join the conversation via WhatsApp at 324-1612. Email tips@CaymanMarlRoad.com. Now, here's your host, Sandy Hill, broadcasting live from the beautiful Cayman Islands.
On and off today with a nice high of about 87 today.
Big news. I have some important news for you.
Interesting news.
It's Blake and Darren's Spilling the Tea with Sandy.
K-Man's top news headlines of the day from CMR.
Let's get the top news headlines of the day.
Hey.
Say hello to Sandy Hill from CMR. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. What's going on?
How are you?
I'm good. Trying to still figure out this camera, child.
Oh no! Well, I got to give a shout out real quick because yesterday I went to see my new glasses.
Those are nice.
So Optical Outlook,
I like them a lot.
Tamika and Tamara. Shout out to them. They helped me out there, and she goes, "I saw you this morning on CMR on the feed."
Oh my gosh, that is so funny.
So shout out. And then also I went to go and pick up my oldest, who Sandy and I have about the same age, my oldest and her child.
Right.
And and one of the teachers, Miss Anna, showed me a screenshot of us on CMR. So
hello, CMR land.
Yeah.
Hey, Sandy, do you like our new logo right here? Let's see if I can. There we go. See our new logo?
I can. Is there something underneath? I can barely see it. There's something underneath the Kiss 106 or no?
No, that's that logo right here. Is this logo?
It's completely new.
That's new.
It's brand new. Now we don't have that thing blocking.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's for the camera. That's for this angle. So you can see.
Yes, looking good. Looking good.
Have you been keeping up with all the Britney Spears stuff?
A little bit. Yes. Kind of
It's
sad,
crazy.
really.
It
It's
is very
very
sad.
sad. It's very sad
Yeah,
to
I
not be
feel-
able
I
to
feel
be in
sorry for
control of your
Brittany.
whole life.
Did you know that part of this conservatorship makes her have an IUD and she can't
Oh my
take it
God.
out? Isn't that like a human rights violation?
Wow. That's so
I mean,
crazy.
also the fact that she was forced to take lithium.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, yep. There's a full transcript if anyone
Yeah,
wants to
I heard
read it.
her testimony was very emotional and stuff. So
Heartbreaking. And if anyone thinks she's incompetent, I would suggest they go and read that because she's not.
yeah.
Sandy,
Yeah.
what you got for us this morning? Any big news?
We have a couple guests that are going to be joining us on the program, including Alric. And of course, everyone is trying to understand the full extent of the regulations. So we're going to be reviewing those. They went live yesterday. So we'll do a little review of those on the program this morning. And in terms of sort of the top headlines, again, there's like continued rollout from that breach for the quarantine situation. So we know now that at least 14 people are in quarantine as a result of that. Yeah.
14.
I thought it was 14 from just HSA. Is it just 14 total?
It's 14 overall. I think 9 of the 14 are HSA.
Wow.
And then there were others.
They're already kind of short-staffed over there.
I don't know.
They're saying.
Do we know how many were vaccinated or?
I don't know with any degree of certainty, but you know, the HSA, I don't know if you guys saw this article last week on CMR, but the HSA has basically said that all their staff are going to have to get vaccinated at contract renewal or when they're offered a new contract. So that's kind of interesting because some people see that as a little bit controversial when your employer tells you that you must get vaccinated, but it makes total sense, right?
Well, but
But
you're in the medical
healthcare
field.
worker.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
frontline.
And also, if you walk through, like, say, where the public health, where you take your children to get vaccinated, it's always they're talking about getting vaccinated and why the science is there. So,
Yeah.
it all kind of makes sense to me that
You don't want to be around medical folks that
are injecting you, but don't believe in the science first.
yeah.
Exactly. And you know, you'd kind of be surprised how many people fall into that category. It's a bit interesting, but in addition to that, we'll have a CMR exclusive. So I'll give you guys a tea here first. There's a little bit of a situation in West Bay where there's 24/7 police presence, and the residents have been saying for the past week, really, what is going on? So apparently one of the recent shooting victims is getting 24/7 police protection.
Hey,
And it's making everybody in the neighborhood a little bit uncomfortable.
I would be a little nervous.
Yes. And this is one that happened on West Bay Road about 2 weekends ago, I think, or 2 or 3 weekends ago. And so the situation there is the police are saying that they don't have the power to put him in witness protection because technically he's not a witness, he's a victim.
Well, where are you going to go, though? It's not
couldn't
like
you be a witness and a victim?
I mean, it's kind of
Can't you
crazy.
be a victim? Can't you be a victim and a witness?
you could.
I mean,
Yeah, of
the
course.
victim
And you
would
would
be
think
professed.
that the same rules would apply for
Oh, wow.
victims that needed protection, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, they seem a bit confused by this current situation. So in the meantime, in a certain neighborhood in West Bay, everybody's walking on eggshells.
Where do you go in Cayman when you're in witness protection?
A place that I lived once had people in
See what I
witness
mean?
protection in front of rented
Really?
one of the places. Yep.
I mean, it's hard to hide Cayman.
Well, no, it's just, you just are moved to somewhere least suspecting of where you live and away from,
It's not like the
a
United
lot
States
of the
where you could go.
local people. Like it would be basically a more touristy area, I would assume.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not like you can go 3,000 miles away from one coast to the other. It's 24 miles here.
There's not only 3 islands.
You're coming back, and then everybody knows you're there.
That's
I was
true.
going to say there's actually 4 islands in the Cayman Islands. The one we don't know about, and that's the witness protection.
Most times they actually send them to the UK, to be honest. They actually send them overseas.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. So, but it's kind of one of those things where sometimes the witness is their own worst enemy because they're still communicating with people here and telling them where they are. So,
Well, how do you cut off your whole life? I mean, I get it. That's
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
Sandy, I think it's a little rude. You don't have your camera on. We can't see you.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of issue with the camera at the moment, so I'm actually going to restart it once we're done. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
In the meantime, you get to look at the super cute photo,
Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. All right, we'll let you go, and you're going to
Thank
start your
you.
show. You can check out CMAR Sandy Hill right now live on Facebook. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Coming up next.
All right, guys. So that is Blake and Aaron on KISS 106.1 FM. I am going to restart my camera. We do have a guest that's waiting, but I'm still getting used to this new camera. So I think you guys remember yesterday it started to overheat a little bit. And I think because I haven't been turning it off because I've been legit a little bit scared of like playing with any of the settings, I've kind of been leaving it on, but I think I can't do that. I just need to learn how to turn it on properly. So hold on one second. Let me turn it off and on. Okay. It says connecting to mass storage. And then I don't know what that means. So at least you can still hear me, which is good. I think I got it. Okay. Is that it? Is that gonna do the trick? All right, I'm still trying to figure it out. This is when I need my husband. I'd be like, honey, help me. Come and help. I think I got it. Yeah. I think I might have it. You know, sometimes you just start pressing buttons and you're just like, press buttons until it works. and then it'll just start working. But you legit don't know what sequence of buttons you're even pressing, right? Crazy. But let's see. I think it's, yeah, there. Hold on. I need to adjust the angle a little bit because I'm moving the camera now. There we go. So I need to make a mental note of exactly what I just did. Yes, and give us a second here. I did see that in the news this morning. About a building collapsing in Miami. That's so crazy. So just catching up here. On a few things. All right, beautiful people. We will have Alric joining us a little bit later on so we can go over a few things, including regulations, the new regulations which dropped yesterday, and a few other things. So we're going to be talking about that. Okay. So let's go ahead and show our Caymanian manners. And we're going to say good morning to Marshall, joining us from North Carolina. Larry's here from New York. Good morning, Larry. We have the beautiful Emma, wishing everyone a blessed day. Miss Morna is here, the ever lovely Miss Morna. She's got her coffee or tea ready. Good morning, Alice. Okay, I've got on mommy hat at the same time, trying to sort out lunch for my daughter. Some days I'm not able to I'm just so busy. I hate to say it, but I don't even have time to pack a lunch for her, much less myself. But she's the priority, right? So we have Krista Bradshaw, who has her meal prep business, and she's able to prepare healthy meals for your kids, by the way. And she can deliver them directly to the schools. And it's fantastic because she gets to sneak in vegetables in the most amazing way. And my daughter enjoys everything that she prepares. So some days I'm like, Krista, make sure we're on the delivery menu today. Good morning, Rosie. So a lot of kids have summer break coming up and summer camps. And, it's kind of different when your children are babies. And we're going to be talking about camp here with Carolina Ferreira in a second from the Cayman Islands Red Cross. But, when they're younger, you put them in daycare and that kind of runs all year round or whatever. As they start to transition and get a little bit older, you're having to think about summer breaks and Easter breaks and all these different breaks that exist. And so it's super interesting not having done any of that before. I'm like having to make mental notes like, okay, we're officially on summer break now. We're on Easter break. And I swear that schools take more breaks than anything. I'm like, why are we taking another break again? I bucked my toe break. What's going on here? But I totally get it because teachers work really, really hard and sometimes they need professional development days. But, as parents, you're just like, no more breaks, because you need the break. So, Irvelyn, good morning. Good morning, Miss Joy. Yes, Irvelyn, we're going to talk about that situation that's happening in West Bay a bit later on. Good morning, Felicia. Julie, thank you so much for tuning in. Janae, thank you. Jasara is here. Louisa is here. Anne Marie, we've just reached 200 people on the live stream. Louis joining us from Detroit. Happy Thursday to you. Ready for class, teacher? He says it's tea time. So nice. We've got Louise joining us from Sydney, Australia. Says that we love the show. Love from down under. Wow. Thank you so much. Ooh, Australia. That's on my bucket list of places to go. But I swear, I'm a little bit afraid of Australia, Louise, because whenever you watch like nature shows and that sort of thing, the snake that's like coming out of the toilet that's going to bite you in the bum and kill you is a toilet in Australia. The supersize tarantula that drops down on you when you're lying in bed, that bed is in Australia. There's just so many venomous things in Australia. Is Australia like the most venomous place in the world? I kind of feel like it is. Down under is very dangerous. Kathy, good morning. Says if it was someone close to you, it would still be a problem. They need to add about 10 more. Is that in relation to the COVID situation or what exactly? I'm not sure what that's about. Elizabeth, buenos dias. Anne Marie, yes, there's a building in Miami that's collapsing. I think your regional correspondent who actually lives in Florida, and I think she's maybe between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. She is going to be working on that story. But yes, that's big news. It's trending this morning. Apparently, a huge building, 12-story residential building, partially collapsed in Miami-Dade County, Florida. I mean, this is crazy. I don't even know how that happens without an earthquake or something. Like, it's like, whoa. Yeah, that's wow. So we'll get some more information about that. Obviously, some of these buildings are huge. So I don't know if it's poor construction, but I'm sure Renee is on that story and she will be putting that up this morning so we can get some more details on that. So it's from Surfside, which is North Miami Beach. And oh my God, the images are horrific. In terms of what has transpired. So, Cayman has a very close connection to a lot of places all over the world. And obviously, Miami is one of those such places given the proximity. So I trust that there are no Caymanians in that building, but Caymanians or not, it's just a very sad situation when you have to hear about such tragic news. So we pray that there's already been one confirmed death. So I'm hoping that maybe that's the limit of it, but it looks pretty bad. So we'll keep you guys updated on that. We remain so incredibly fortunate on so many levels. And speaking of buildings collapsing, a bit later on, we can talk about how high are we going to go here in Cayman, because there was an application yesterday being heard by planning that, is looking at going 10 stories in central Georgetown. And when Alric comes on, we are also going to discuss a few things in relation to these boards. The planning board comes under a lot of scrutiny, but a lot of these boards, I think, need to be properly scrutinized. So Jake, good morning, my dear. Says to just hit it a couple times until it works, the camera, or until it doesn't work, right? Yeah, we don't want to hit electronic equipment here. Child, you can't afford to replace it, so you got to treat it like a baby. Brandon, good morning. Tommy joining us in the Bahamas. Thank you. Louis Fay is here. Louisa says, loving the blue today. Thank you very much. Indira, good morning. Lady Demuse, good morning to you. Good morning, everyone, she says. Jackie is here. Dawn is here. Dawn, I've not seen you in a minute. Where have you been? Dawn says, I love the picture quality of the new camera. You know, Dawn, I didn't realize that it would make such a difference. And I got to be honest with you, the real reason I changed it out is because I like what in the photography world they call bouquet, or depends on who you speak to, they pronounce it differently. But it's kind of where you get the blurred background. So that's what I like about this. Well, it's the lens that really gives you that ability. And that's specifically why I purchased this lens, which wasn't cheap, to go with this Sony camera. So in the world of photography, when you buy a camera, a lot of times you get what's called the kit lens that comes with it if you buy it as a package. But sometimes it's in your best interest to buy just the body, the camera body, and then you buy the lenses that you want. But honey child, lenses are not cheap. And this is a fixed focal point. But lenses can be like thousands of dollars just for the lens. And I'm not a professional photographer, so I try my best in terms of keeping it reeled in with the expenses involved. But I definitely can appreciate, Dawn, how important a lens is. And I think now that so many people actually have commented since we've been using this lens on the quality of the picture, it's obvious that the camera and the lens really has made that difference, because I'm still the same. I haven't changed. I haven't done anything. So if I'm looking better, it's thanks to the new camera and lens. Heather, good morning to you. So good to see you. Gigi, good morning. Good morning, Bishop Hero Blair. So good to see you. Benji is here. He says, good morning, Marl Rhodians. And I think that we might have to settle on that name for who we are. Wanda, good to see you. Miss Ann Rice, who's out of quarantine, is joining us. Carmelie is here. Good morning. Carson, C.E. Bank says, good morning, Sandra. Good morning, Cayman Islands, and happy Thursday. Yeah, this is Friday, part 1. Charlotte, hey, beautiful Charlotte, joining us from the UK. King, also from the UK, he says, I like the lens. Yes. Hello, Barbara. Hi, David from London. We got a lot of people from the UK. Judy is here. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, so folks, we do have the lovely Carolina. I always have to think about how I'm actually pronouncing her name. Carolina, I think is the proper pronunciation. Ferreira, who's joining us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
How are you? I'm good. You look beautiful.
Oh, it might be a camera trick as well. I'm not sure because it's too early.
I know, right? But the hair looks good. The hair is on fleek.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Charm is here. The beautiful Charm had a birthday this weekend, and she celebrated in proper fashion. So, Catalina, speaking of beauty, I know that as working moms, we don't have a whole lot of time to do things in the beauty department. I think most moms can relate to that. And I always have an issue with dry skin, and I try to moisturize as much as I can, especially my face, because I know it helps with like wrinkles and whatever. I'm kind of getting to that point in life where wrinkles might start, the middle age flex. And I have this thing here. I always put these down. I always forget that they're here, but I picked it up this morning. It's called Healthy Skin Vitamin E and Aloe Vera Lotion. But the cool thing about this, I can't even remember where I bought these. I kind of feel like this might have been an Amazon purchase like a long time ago. But the super cool thing about this is they come in a little capsule. So it's like a little gold capsule. It's like a little, and why I like it, I'm sure it's, great lotion, like probably a lot of others, just for your face. But the reason I really like it is sometimes I'm like running around and I forget to I don't have lotion in my handbag or whatever. And so I can stick these like in places, like I can put it in the car and it's not going to get messy or whatever until I'm ready to break the capsule. And one of these, they're kind of tiny, but one of these can actually last you a couple times. So in case anybody's looking for some portable options for especially keeping your face nice and moisturized, there you go. Sandra Coe, good morning. She says, I am a Marl Rodian. I'm hooked. Irvelyn, thank you so much. She likes that name as well. So I think we're going to settle on that. We'd had some recommendations on what to call ourselves. I like that one. So Carolina, next week on the 29th, we're going to be celebrating our anniversary, which is next week, Tuesday.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, 4 years already. Can you believe
I know. That's crazy.
It's crazy. So we're going to be doing a lot of things, including starting a book club soon, which I think is a lot of fun. So we will be reading along and discussing some of the items in our book list. Now, I don't want people to forget today kicks off the Roy Bodden Symposium. So that's this starting at 9:00, I believe, this morning, today and tomorrow. So please check that out. We're going to live stream it here after the program. We'll pull the live stream in so you guys can enjoy that throughout the day in case you're not able to actually attend that event. So Carolina, you're always super busy. I love that you do so many things in relation to safety for our children. And here we are. I was just talking about the summer months are here, and a lot of parents are already thinking about, what camps they want to put their kids in. Can they afford camp, which is like a big thing.
Yep.
And you've got to consider all of your options. But the most important thing before, looking at what the camp offers and costs and all those things is overall camp safety. And so you are here to tell us a little bit about that this morning. So tell us what initiative you've been working on and why it's so important for everyone, all parents and camp workers and, NGOs who put on these camps and so on, to really consider what safety protocols they have in place for children.
No, absolutely. And thank you. And I know that you're always having the conversation about, sexual abuse prevention and things that are happening as well. But obviously, it's not just about sexual abuse. It's also about physical, emotional abuse and, anything else that might happen along those lines. So what we've been working on, and this isn't something that we just started now, we've actually been at this. It's going to be 10 years next year, believe it or not.
Wow.
What we want people to know, because we have both new parents as far as people who just had kids or just like you have kids who are now at camp age, as well as people who are new to the island, to understand that there are still no national standards for youth serving organizations in Cayman, outside of educational institutions. And summer camps is actually the sort of the catalyst for a lot of the work that we ended up starting to do in child protection, because essentially, summer and summer camps end up being kind of a free-for-all in a lot of ways. There's no one there that is actually ensuring that the people who are providing these camp services, which are necessary because, working parents need to have a place to send their kids. Kids need a place to socialize as well. And it really shouldn't be this whole, you get what you pay for kind of attitude, and this is how it is that we end up making vulnerable children even more vulnerable, independently of where they fall in the social economic scale, So I think that we have certain expectations of what has been done before a camp gets set out that really don't exist. And it's important that parents and guardians actually ask questions of their summer camp providers. Now, if your summer camp provider is a school or an early education center, so primary, secondary schools and early education centers all have to go through a very stringent process when it comes to safeguarding. So they should have everything on point as far as, ensuring that they're meeting best practices. Everybody else, and that includes tertiary education institutions, the youth serving organizations that are NPOs, vacation Bible schools, as well as those private sector companies that are now running summer camps because our borders are closed and they're finding other ways and whatnot to offer services to the communities. There is nothing there that is mandating that they do anything in particular about safeguarding. So it's just a question of, are the people who are running these camps aware of safeguarding best practices, and have they implemented them? So we created a little flyer, which I'll be happy to, it's on our Facebook page at the Red Cross, which I'll share with you if you want to share it as well. But it breaks down the 6 questions that parents should be asking. And I wanted to talk about those as well as the answers that you should be listening out for as a parent when you ask these questions. Yeah?
Yeah, this is awesome.
Awesome.
So, how many children do you think participate in summer camp? Do we have any ideas of numbers?
I don't, but I know it would be thousands, simply just because, of the number of kids that we have in general. And, like I said, between the parents that need the camps to be able to go to work and the parents who want the camps to have their kids be able to socialize, we know that it's definitely a lot.
Yes. So I'm looking for the checklist. You said it's on your...
It's on our Facebook page. It's like, it's what we call the 6 questions. And let me see.
I'm scrolling down here trying to find it.
It would have been a boosted post as well. But I can get started reading them if you'd like.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No problem. So the first question that we ask people, or we have people ask, is basically, what is your organization's hiring practice? So, and what you're basically trying to find out from that question is whether or not that's an organization that is proactive or reactive. In other words, and it's just like, as part of your hiring practice, are you doing background checks, or are you asking for criminal history records? Are you having interview questions for applicants that present them with scenarios about, what get them to think on their feet, right? Are you doing reference checks? A lot of us ask for references for people who we're going to have come work in our organization. However, it's like very rarely do we actually call the reference checks and ask them, standardized questions. And are we calling, previous employers and making the referees and letting them be aware that this person is looking to work with children? And it's just like, so again, simple question, this person will be working with children. Is there anything in their background that might make you uncomfortable about that? Or would you hire this person again? So things like that, where the person on the other line doesn't really have to say much, because if someone goes, and you're like, okay, maybe we need to kind of look deeper into, this person that we might be hiring.
Yes.
And
now,
again,
isn't it weird, Carolina, that you feel kind of funny even putting people to task with those types of questions? Like, I was just thinking about that, about how comfortable I would be saying to a summer camp, can you let me know if any of your, camp teachers or facilitators have ever been in trouble with the law or anything like that? Like, it's kind of like I shouldn't feel uncomfortable doing it, but I could see definitely how people would, because it's kind of not even the norm here, you know?
Right. And I mean, and if you don't, I mean, these are the questions that really, that part of the question is what employers should be
Yeah.
asking. So
Yes.
all that you're asking
right.
is, what are your organization's hiring practices?
I see.
So what you're trying to figure out is, what steps have they taken to vet
Right.
this person that they have hired? Yeah.
Mhm.
And then when you look at question number 2, where it asks, does your organization recruit volunteers, and what does that process entail? So
Okay.
again, you're listening out for the same things, because from a best practices perspective, volunteers should have the same type of checks as staff members do, because they are going to have access to children in the same way. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, so what you're trying to figure out is, what kind of safeguarding culture really does this organization have from the
Mm.
get-go, so that by the time, so if I want to volunteer with your, with your vacation Bible school and whatnot, are you ensuring that I'm not only the best person sort of qualified, but also that you've done your due diligence? Because one of the things that we know that happens is that when you have a scenario the way that we do here, where certain organizations are following best practices and others are not, there are people who are going to be, who are going to look at what we require at the Red Cross and say, like, nah, that's too much. And they're going to go somewhere else where it's easier for them to get into. And this is the kind of mentality that perpetrators have, in terms of wanting to go to places where people aren't going to be asking a lot of questions. And there's this understanding that there's this tremendous need either for staff or volunteers, right? Almost to the point where it is that we're thinking that, you're doing us a favor, kind of thing. Volunteerism is amazing, and it is something that, we need to push more in Cayman, but, there's still an aspect of safeguarding that comes with volunteerism, both for the volunteer and for the child, and that's what these, when we're talking about safeguarding strategies, those strategies actually help to protect everyone, so that they understand, how to ensure that kids are safe, and staff and volunteers and adults are behaving in a way that is appropriate as well. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So the third question actually goes to about the ratios of adults per child in the camp session or the program. So, and what we're looking for here is basically to see how the organization has planned to either minimize or expressly prohibit isolated one-on-one interactions, right, between adults and children, and even between sort of older children and younger children. Because one of the things that people fail to remember when it comes to child sexual abuse is that perpetrators can also be older kids, right? So for anyone who's done the Darkness to Light Stewards of Children program, you may remember that there is one of the examples that is provided there is the fact that there was a vacation Bible school in the States where they had a teenager who was running the camp or the session with a group of 5-year-olds, and by the time they caught on to what was happening, he had abused the entire class. So these are things, again, in terms of the ratios, try to figure it out, and the ratio should be significantly higher for younger kids, and in terms of, but always requiring at least 2 adults that are present at all times, with the plans for emergency or special circumstances where it is that you may have one of the adults have to leave for any particular reason, having somebody else there to cover. If it's a summer camp or something where kids are young enough that they may need, that they may have diapers, or that they may need help, like with, changing clothes and all of that. So some summer camps do field trips and on the like. So what is the protocol then for helping kids, who need to need support with toileting or changing clothing and all of that stuff? So you need to be asking and sort of trying to figure out what the ratios are, and then maybe getting into it a little bit more depending on the age of your child. And we also encourage asking about a code of conduct for all staff and volunteers, because the code of conduct is basically what puts everyone on the same page as far as expectations go. And a good code of conduct should be explicit about appropriate and inappropriate behavior, both in terms of physical behavior as well as communications, access to technology, and all of those things, right? Because sexual abuse isn't just about what they're doing to a child, but exposure to pornography or, other things are also considered abusive to children.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the last sort of 3 questions focus on what sort of training and qualifications are required for your staff and volunteers. So again, there is a requirement in our law, the Children's Act 2012, actually creates a designation for mandated reporters. So we know, doctors, nurses, teachers, youth service workers, social workers, and whatnot, and persons who are working with young people in that camp capacity would end up being considered a mandated reporter, independently of whether they're doing it just for the time of the summer or they're doing it throughout the year. So do people understand that, especially for the organizations that are maybe private sector and are now running camps and whatnot, and certainly the ones who maybe like I said, in terms of tertiary education, who normally deal with older students but are now dealing with younger students, understanding that they are all mandated reporters. And if they do, is everybody empowered in that organization to know exactly how to recognize, respond to, and report suspicions of abuse, both internally and externally, right? So in other words, if a child is coming in who may be exposed to abuse, be it either at home or through another provider and whatnot, and that child is showing, potential signs that they need additional support, or, if the child discloses, because as someone working in a camp setting, you may very well become that child's safe adult, does that person know how exactly to report in a way that is not only consistent with the law, but that will do no more harm for that child who has disclosed, Do you know not to barrage them with questions and, ask only open-ended questions, and even so just enough for you to be able to formulate that report so that the people at the police and DCFS who are going to do a proper interview can move forward with that. But similarly, what happens if there is a suspicion of abuse inside the summer camp? Do you know how to report and take those steps? And do you know even how to recognize it? Because a lot of times it is more likely that instead of having, say, a child disclose, or even for you to discover abuse, which means you walk in on something, you end up reaching the threshold for reasonable suspicion based on things like the violation of a code of conduct, right? So if your code of conduct is saying, no meeting behind closed doors, and your safe environment policy is saying doors need to be open and the glass on them need to be free of coverings, and you see that there's one camp person that always has the glass in the door covered, the door is always closed, and they always have either that one specific child, when it's like with them and whatnot. It's not just one occurrence that's going to be enough, but if you notice a pattern of behavior, then you have enough for, reasonable cause, and that needs to be then taken upwards, just to see in terms of how does the organization handle this, right? So do people know that? And that's where the training comes in. And it's just like, so when you're asking them, what sort of training and qualifications are you requiring? You're trying to see, yes, at the very minimum, we've done the Stewards of Children training, but we've also gone through, additional training for recognition of, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. We've trained people on our policies and our procedures to make sure that they know what they're going to be doing. Yeah. Okay. And then question 5 asks about will all adults who will have access to my child be vetted? Again, because now this is not just about the staff and the volunteers who are there all the time. Is it the guest lecturers, the janitorial staff, all these other people? Because we saw what happened with that case with the AC repairman, right? It doesn't really take long for certain people who want to do children harm to try something. So, so it's again, what level of vetting are we asking of the service providers, or what exactly is the organization going to do if you do need to have, or if you're planning on having external people coming and interacting with the campers. And last but not least, kind of going back to that, what is your policy for reporting the suspicion, discovery, or disclosure of child abuse? So, and that's a good question to ask, maybe not so much of the head of the camps, but also the person who you may be dropping off your, your children with, and just say, hey, can you just let me know what exactly your process is for reporting suspicion of child abuse? Because if that person doesn't know, then it means that, it's like that, even if the organization has something in place, it hasn't trickled down to the very people who are going to be interacting with kids. So if they don't know it, then it becomes something that you can raise when it comes to that with the camp directors. So the whole aim of this really and truly is we need to ask more questions now because summer is upon us again. We need to ensure that we are protecting all of our kids, not just, making the assumptions that those who can afford it end up getting better care than the ones, who can't. And it's the kids who don't have people to advocate for them who are the ones that end up suffering the most, right? So, so it's like the vulnerability aspect of it. And I think our long-term goal needs to be to start pushing for these national standards because, it's like we need to set house rules for ourselves in Cayman. We have people who are coming from all over the world, and we have our own sort of ideas about childhood and children and whatnot, and because we don't have anything that kind of, protects childhood, right, and protects children in a really distinct way. That's how it is that we end up with all these horrible scenarios, of things that happen, and people saying, "Oh, but this is completely normal that you go to the beach and get a little groping when and it's just it's like all of those things that we then hear, and then we're like, but it's in part of it, it's our fault as well as the community, because we've allowed it to get to that point. We have created a culture that protects perpetrators and makes children vulnerable. So it is on us to change it to a culture that actually protects children and protects their childhood.
Wow. That's wonderful, Carolina. And I think it's, even as someone who sees myself as an advocate for children, it has certainly got me thinking, because again, sometimes you put your kids in schools or in programs and you think more about the academic side of things, like, show me your curriculum and all this sort of thing, but you don't ask about the child safeguarding policies that are in place, which is very, very important. So we have some comments that are coming in from our viewers. So David shares that in the UK, everyone working with vulnerable persons or children have to do a DBS check before even considering starting to work. Good morning, Miss Iva. Loretta's here joining us, and she says that volunteering is one of her passions. Gabby has shared that she's done the Darkness to Light program, and it was very, very informative and reminding everyone that it's actually free and available at no cost. David says that the standard DBS check checks your criminal record, which will show details of all spent and unspent convictions. Oh, wow. Cautions, reprimands, and final warnings held at the central police station, apart from protected convictions and cautions. So very, very interesting. I wonder how readily available that information is even here in Cayman. Because I think as it stands now, a third party couldn't obtain that information because of privacy rights, I guess, without asking the party who's about to actually get it for them, sort of thing. So Sophia and Cecil are also here. Gabby says that's right, because sickos and pedophiles keep coming out of the woodworks. They're everywhere. Unfortunately, that is true. And a lot of them will target situations where they are in close proximity to children.
And can I just make a comment about that? I think we use the word pedophiles interchangeably with perpetrators, right?
Yes.
And part of the issue with that is the fact that, pedophilia as an actual diagnosis, in terms of talking about it from that psychiatric perspective, right? Whereas we're talking about perpetrators, where we're talking about people who also just have the opportunity, right? So there is nothing else going on behind, sort of in terms of their mental state or anything else. And part of the problem with that is the fact that when we talk about the pedophile or the sicko and whatnot, we're othering people, meaning that we're trying to remove ourselves from sort of their proximity. When in reality, in 90% of cases of child sexual abuse, the perpetrator is known and possibly loved by both the victim and the family, because the grooming process isn't just about the kid and getting the kid to that point. It's also about getting the adults to, when the report or when the allegation comes out, to be able to say, no, it couldn't be that person. So, and because it is predominantly people that we don't give access to our children, to the people that we think are a little off. We don't give access to our children to, you know, to the creepo with, you know, the trench coat, and to that person that you think is just whatever. And this is why it's such a problem. It's because it's not about sort of that person over there, that sicko, that pedophile. It ends up being people in our wheelhouse. It is, you know, be it the pastor, the teacher, or a sibling of ours, you know, an uncle, an aunt, remembering that women can in fact be perpetrators as well. So I think it's just like the way in which we other when talking about potential perpetrators, it creates this false sense of security within our own spheres, when realistically it's the people that we're giving access to our children, who are the ones that, you know, everyone who's had, you know, has ended up being victimized or had some lines crossed and whatnot, the access was given to them, to the children, and there was that level of trust. So it's important to remember that, because that makes us a lot more uncomfortable to think that it could be your friend, your family member, someone that you've had a long-standing relationship with, that could in fact cross those boundaries. But, you know, there's still things that you can do that, you know, helps to create a culture of safety around your child. And certainly, you know, Stewards of Children gives you some very good ideas when it comes to that, and learning a little bit more about safeguarding in these institutions that are supposed to be institutions of trust and safety helps to do that as well. But there isn't any one thing that we do, Sandy. Like safeguarding is a choice that you make every single day. So yes, having a more thorough sort of background check and whatnot is super helpful, but it's not the only thing. You still need to do your reference checks. You still need to have your strategy in place, your code of conduct, your policies, your mandatory reporting. You still need to be observing people. You still need to be, you know, it's an ongoing thing that we do every day. And it's, you know, and we feel like, oh, it's so much work because we have all these other things to do. But that's what it takes in order to protect children, you know, and it's like, it's not a one and done kind of situation.
Right. Well, Carolina, thank you so much. This has certainly been good food for thought. Folks, the bottom line really is to ask questions of anyone who is going to be providing camp services or educational services or have access to your children. I thank her for coming onto the program this morning as summer camps just rev up, because there's all sorts of summer camps. I've been seeing a lot of them being organized and, you know, promoted. So make sure that you are asking more about just what's on the activities list for your children, but you're asking questions that speak to how well they have thought through child safeguarding and the policies that they have in place, the background checks and so forth, to just ensure that your children are as safe as possible. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that information.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions, if anybody wants to speak to me offline as well, you can reach me on 916-1742 or deputy@redcross.org.ky. I'll be more than happy. And if there are people who are running summer camps here who want more information and want to be a bit more proactive when it comes to that, we can offer information for them as well, because our whole aim is to build capacity within the community, right? So we know summer camps are there and they have a purpose, and, you know, there's supposed to be these great things and we want them there. We just want the safest version of any summer camp for our kids.
So Alwick has a few questions in relation to this. He's actually in the back room. And he says volunteers may be assisting with programs where children are involved, and some people volunteer to get points for permanent residency, but in some cases, insufficient background checks were completed prior to the person's arrival to Cayman. We have seen breakdowns over the years where we have discovered things through investigations for new crimes. Can we create a safe list of volunteers?
So because Cayman is so transient, right? It makes it really, really difficult to be able to. So just to give you an example, at the Red Cross, we may have, we may have upwards of 40 people at any quarter sign up as new volunteers, right? So you would think at that rate that we're looking at anywhere between, like 160 plus people that would be quote unquote joining the organization every year. And yet our number of volunteers stays pretty steady anywhere between 200 to 250. And that's just because either people have signed up and don't follow through, or because as we get new people in, sort of old people are leaving. So, so you have this sort of ongoing thing in trying to, I think what we need to do, rather than try to create a safe list of volunteers, would actually be how do we then engage be it the law enforcement, Department of Children and Family Services, in our connections elsewhere, to be able to have a more thorough process that's also more accessible to NGOs, because, it's like you can get a background check on people. I think that the cost for that was at least $100. And for people who want to, to volunteers or NGOs that want to bring people in, that may price them out completely, right? And even so, we're not talking about, checking the reports that may have been made against somebody. The police clearance gives you, some very basic information. So I think it is, like I said, there isn't any one thing. I think there's ways in which we can enhance the current system, ask better questions, and get other things. But realistically, this is a problem that you see elsewhere in the world, because like even in the States, you don't have a centralized database to be able to run background checks on everybody. Like you either have to do it by the state, or, and you have to kind of look in different places. So I think it's about looking at what it is that we can control. And part of the things that we can control end up being the things that we do here at home, which is asking those questions, checking the references, making sure that you have your processes in place in your organization to ensure that you're creating spaces where people have to adhere to safeguarding standards.
Very good. Yeah. So again, a holistic approach, which is what we see is needed for a lot of social and community issues. So Carolina, thank you very much as usual.
Thanks for having me.
For coming on the program. Folks, reach out to the Cayman Islands Red Cross if you'd like some more information on the types of questions that you should be asking of summer camp programs. It's the best thing for your children to ensure that not, again, just what's being offered, but the types of people that are working with your children and what policies are in place to protect your children. Any little thing that happens at a facility, you should be, as a parent, be made aware of immediately, so that then you can take appropriate action if necessary. But ask these questions beforehand, before you make a decision about where to place your kids. It's not just about money and the cost of the camp and all those sorts of things, because anyone can put safeguarding guidelines and principles and programs in place that protect everyone. So again, thank you, my dear. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay. Have a wonderful day. All right, good folks. That's Carolina Ferreira from the Cayman Islands Red Cross. She does a lot of work with child protection. She's part of the MASH unit, which again is a multi-agency child protection unit that was formed because of our numerous failures as it relates to our children and prosecuting and investigating criminal allegations of abuse. So we often refer a number of stories to the MASH unit. And yes, make sure that you know what to do. I have parents reaching out to me all the time because they feel like I am their voice and their only hope for someone who will listen. Even just up to yesterday, I had someone reach out on behalf of a parent who is having some concerns about an incident at one of the local government schools. But it doesn't matter if it's government school, private school, summer camp. Sometimes people just don't know who to reach out to and, what protocols or steps to take. So we try to point you guys in the right direction for sure. So good morning to Senor Alric Lindsay. Buenos dias.
Good morning. Very interesting show.
Yes, we're only just getting started.
Yeah.
We have Sue joining us. Good morning. Louis is asking or saying that we need a sex offender registry. Well, Louis, we've been pushing for that for probably close to 20 years by now. Like, I'm legit losing count. I know it's been over 10 years that the petition was presented to the government of the day, which I think was the previous UDP government, but subsequent governments have done absolutely nothing about it. So we will push the PAC government to consider that. That's one of the things that perhaps I need to pull their ear on. Louis also says, very good program. Sandy, thank you for bringing this topic to our communities, and good work to Carolina Ferreira, which you can find over at the Cayman Islands Red Cross. So Alric is in the studio.
Yeah. So very interesting program because, the question she answered earlier was in relation to the transient population. So people come and go to Cayman all the time. So I guess it's harder to create a safe list because of that. But I think, it's tricky, right? Because
it's probably even more necessary, though, to do it.
Yeah,
that's
what I think, that you'd probably have to do it more frequently.
Yeah.
And you'd probably have to deem some of those people to be higher risk because they're always coming and going, and you don't know what's happening in the overseas country.
Yeah.
So,
and what's interesting, Alric, is a lot of child molesters who are opportunists. They have recognized over the years that the Caribbean, like a lot of Asian countries, there's certain jurisdictions or certain geographical areas that tend to have weak policies in place, and it's a lot easier to prey on children because of the lack of attention to certain issues, because of the lack of legislation that protects children, because of the social attitudes even towards children. It is easier for them to become victims and to be extremely vulnerable. So we know for a fact that people in, for example, the US and Canada and elsewhere in the world, one of their regions of choice, if they're looking to relocate because things are getting a little bit hot in their particular jurisdiction, is to target the Caribbean as a whole. And we are, folks, part of the Caribbean. So they come here and we're sleepy little Cayman Islands. They figure, oh, they're not paying attention to what's going on. They're not checking, criminal records of people online and that sort of thing. So they're happy to come and try to make your child the next victim. So because of that very transient nature of our population here in the Cayman Islands, we have an obligation to be even more vigilant than we normally would. So Alwick, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It is Thursday, folks, June the 24th. I can't believe it, but in a week, it's going to be July. Is that not crazy? A little bit of rain overnight. Alwick, it was a busy week. Lots going on in the community. We are going to be talking about some of those topics with you this morning. One of the hot button topics during this week was that there was a quarantine situation where some 14 people have now been placed in quarantine because an individual, and government has never given us the details around how the individual was discovered to have had to have been COVID positive, and now they're in the ICU, allegedly in stable condition. They have said that much, but they didn't give us any of the details. And so a lot of people were questioning and asking me, well, why is HSA staff being quarantined because of this? How does that breach happen? Why are other people being placed in quarantine and so on? And so, our sources came forward and said, actually, what ended up happening was that this person who had not yet gotten out of quarantine, they were on their 14th day. I guess they're going to be tested later that day, had some sort of an incident where they appeared to have passed out or fell ill or something. And another person just randomly passing by who did not know them stopped to render assistance. And in rendering assistance, they then went home after that and exposed an entire household of people. So all of those individuals have to be quarantined. I guess the medical, the EMT staff, and the initial, staff at the hospital also didn't recognize that this person was a quarantine person. I don't know how that happens. I don't know how the wristband was hidden or what, but it exposed some 9 healthcare professionals who are now in quarantine as well. Alric, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think are some of the failings of the system that could even make this possible?
Well, I don't know all the facts in this situation,
Yes.
but
something has gone wrong here.
It could have been a human error. I don't know
Yeah.
what the facts are, but if it was a human error, then they probably need to go back and look at their procedures. And not everyone is going to admit that if a mistake was made. Not everyone is going to admit that the mistake was made, because, as you know, this is largely political as well.
Yeah.
So you have to separate the health risk from the political risk. So obviously the health risk is much more important to us as citizens or residents, and nobody wants to get sick. So if there are any procedures lacking, then they need to be strengthened to reduce the health risk or minimize the health risk. The other side of the coin is they may not want to tell us the full information because of the political risk. And as you know, the opposition would love to hear any information and any failings in relation to health risk and procedures, because then they would take advantage of it, politically. So I think there are just those two things to look at. And like I said, I don't know the facts in this situation, but like I say, if there is some human error or if there's some breakdown in procedures, then I would suggest that the relevant parties get a hold of it quickly, because we are planning a reopening and those dates are being suggested. And so before that date happens, any issues within the system or procedures
need to be ironed out.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and I think one of the issues as well, or one of the areas of concerns, is the fact that we haven't had a lot of information. I get the public health's desire to maintain the privacy of these individuals. We do our best to ensure that happens as well. So, for example, I actually know the name of the person. I know exactly where they live. I have all the details. I know it's a Jamaican national. There's no such thing as information in Cayman that CMR can't access normally. But having said that, we respect people's right to privacy. But I think that when enough information isn't shared, so I had someone over the course of, Tuesday evening and so on, sharing with me their concerns. They were like, why is it that, the minister, for example, has not made a statement on this? Like, they felt like something needed to be said and a bit more needed to be done. And this was some of their comments. They said, I understand this new government is very hush hush. And again, I think this is a perception and not necessarily the reality. But as I say on this program, perception is reality for 99% of the people. And then they say more than I have seen in years on years. It's like a secret we, the public, are trying to discover about everything. You don't hire someone and then they go on to, say why they think the government has been quiet is because maybe they don't understand the PR game. There might be some truth to that. I think we've discussed that before, but more importantly, I think that people want to hear, and this is a message for the Minister of Health and her team. People want to hear in a situation like this, because this is a big deal, actually, to have a person collapse and be put in the ICU unit because of a highly, what was the term that they used? I forget the exact wording, but even the government officials expressed how serious of a case this was with the terminology they used in their press release. So they said highly symptomatic individual or infection. So again, that speaks to the seriousness of it. And I think that coming forward and at least having a conversation with the people. It doesn't have to be, you know, an hour-long press briefing, but just to alleviate the concerns of people who are now thinking, wow, one single incident, and this goes back to how incredibly precarious the situation is with COVID. One single incident has now compromised at least 15 people or 14 people who are all in quarantine. And that speaks to why we need to have it together, because if we're thinking about reducing quarantine to 5 days and, you know, doing all these other measures as we edge closer to reopening, which will be an eventual reality, if we don't have these procedures in place, I think we're going to have some real issues. Another criticism that has been levied against the government, not just one of communication and lack of information and, you know, speaking to the people directly. Sometimes you just can't leave it to public health as an elected official. You were elected, or you have been elected to be the people's representative and be the people's voice. So if they're saying that we want to hear from you, getting a press release from public health just isn't enough. I think that the powers that be certainly need to be paying attention. But in addition to that, there are people who have levied concerns for months now that they are just very, very concerned about the lack of precise procedures for those who are in quarantine. But since we have introduced the home quarantining option, there's a team out there that goes around, you know, checking, doing wellness checks. They're supposed to call people and whatever. But there are people who've gone through the entire quarantine process and said they were never contacted by a single person except on their last day when it was time to get their final test to be released. Any thoughts, Alric, on how we could implement some better procedures to ensure that people are being checked on? They're getting these wellness checks, they're doing the random spot checks and so on?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing is look at all of the unemployed people, you know, all these unemployed Caymanians. Why not pay some of them to be making the calls and checking up on all the quarantine people? Make them go through the training to understand what questions they need to ask, and you know who they need to report that information back to. So that's one solution, is to just get some of the unemployed people employed doing those things. You know, they may not be medical professionals, but they can gather the information and ask the questions that the medical professionals direct them to ask, and then report that information back. And once the relevant parties get the information, they can act on it. Other than getting the unemployed people employed doing that, they're probably, if it is not in place, they probably need to have a system where, you know, it's every 2 days or the end of every day. I do not know what they currently do, but I would suggest that if they're not doing it, to do something at the end of each day or end of, you know, every 2 days, just something, because anything could happen to a person in quarantine.
Absolutely.
Especially if that person is alone. So, you know, it is important to do regular checks. And if you say that you're short staff, then there are a lot of unemployed people that can be employed to assist you. But to go back to what you were saying about not enough information being provided, I was thinking about that, and I was saying how, you know, over the past couple of years, the general public in Cayman has been asking for transparency. And I think because of the public demanding transparency for so long, we now have this momentum that was built up to the election. And so I think everyone is expecting that the new government show as much transparency as possible, and more transparency than the previous government. Obviously, one of the challenges when it comes to health information is that, you know, that's people's personal data. And so while it would be ideal to know, you know, which areas people are living in quarantine, or which specific homes are in quarantine, or a list of persons who are positive and live in a certain area, although all the information would be ideal to have, I think we probably also have to consider our data protection legislation. And nowadays, people are supposed to have control over their own personal data, and they can actually tell you actually have to explain to them how you're going to use their data, and they have the right to tell you to stop using their data. So it's when it comes to transparency, yes, I do agree there should be transparency, but then there are probably some limits on that placed on what you can actually tell people in the public. So, and that is usually governed by
The data protection.
Yeah, so it's probably a little complicated in some cases.
Yeah.
But I'm not a spokesperson for Mr. Bryan or Mrs. Turner. But what I would say is that what I know of them is that they probably want to gather the facts first, because remember, whatever your MP says to you, you're gonna grab onto and hold on to, and you're gonna repeat it, and it's gonna be taken up as a high value within the community. So I think that's why it's important for them to get the facts right in the first place.
I think what ends up happening, Alric, is government ministers are happy for the civil servants to simply, they all have PR people within, like each individual ministry or whatever. And I think they're happy for those people to just do their jobs and to write a press release. But what I'm hearing, for example, for that young man who reached out, is they want to hear, even if it's the same message that's in the press release, they actually want to hear it from their MP. That's the kind of politics that we have in Cayman, where people like that direct line of communication from their elected officials. So Alba, buenos días, ¿cómo estás? Estoy bien. Muy bien. And we have Elizabeth, who's also joining us. She said, what about all those people on the flight? Are they now in quarantine? So Elizabeth, one of the interesting things that we discovered yesterday is that when this person came in and they were tested at the airport, they actually tested negative at that point in time. So again, this speaks to how the COVID-19 virus operates. So you can be negative at arrival, and then some 14 days later, you can be highly symptomatic and highly contagious. Pretty crazy, but that's exactly what happened. So presumably, if they tested negative at the airport upon arrival, they were simply not releasing or shedding enough of the virus to even get a positive result. So hopefully that means that they would have also not been entirely able to transmit it. And that's, again, why during travel, they still want you to follow certain protocols. You still have to wear your mask, and, they're supposed to be doing social distancing on the flights and that sort of thing. Carol also has a question, says, did they know he was positive, or did that come out when he arrived at the hospital? Carol, I believe, from understanding the flow of events, that would have happened at some point once he arrived at the hospital, because otherwise we wouldn't have public health officials, or when I say public health, I mean HSA employees, some 9 of them now having to isolate because of this single incident, because surely they would have been taking the necessary precautions had they known that he was positive, or had they suspected he was positive. They would have been using the necessary PPE equipment and so on to protect themselves. So I honestly believe that they had no idea. Again, there's this question of, what can happen with residents where you don't know if that person is a quarantine home or not, and kind of how that works. Someone else mentioned to me last night as well, that at the end of the day, even the transport, like the taxi drivers that are in this pool of taxi drivers to actually transport people to their quarantine homes, a lot of times they have said, when they're going to resident, because they have to find the home locations and whatever, that they're having difficulties, and someone just said this to me yesterday, they're having difficulties even locating the addresses because some of them have no house numbers and that sort of thing. And they've raised concerns about how that's possible and how the quarantine team, even vetted that residence for approval. Like if you go to a residence and someone says, okay, I'm at number 125 Seaview Road, and you can't even determine which one is 125 because it has no house number, how do you approve that location? Like in the event that something happens and the hospital, the ambulance has to go there, whatever, in relation to COVID, they just felt like there's certain protocols that need to be tightened up a bit for this to work. And you would think that as long as we've been doing the home quarantining now, that this is something like this, in my mind, these procedural things, these procedural kinks should have been worked out a long time ago. Like, I don't understand why this is still being brought up as different areas of concern in relation to home quarantining.
Well, I mean, when I was doing the campaign, that one of the issues that arose was we had the procedure to be at least 6 feet away from a door, but that had nothing to do with COVID. It was because we wanted to show respect for the homeowners. And it was a good thing that we did that, because I remember one time one person actually came to the door and they said that they were in quarantine. And we would not have known anything, better, because there was no way to identify the home. So, I mean, at that time, I thought to myself, what if we could have a sticker on a quarantine home that shows that they're in quarantine? But then you'll get into the argument that people will say, well, then that's going to put that person in a situation where, they're like shunned by the rest of the community. And so, it's possible that argument gets raised, but I think it's important to know which area is being used for quarantine when it comes to those private facilities, those private residences. I think that's important, that the people that live in a certain area, they know. But then again, I remember you wanting to have a sex offenders list years ago, and I don't think that was successful. So it's sort of a similar sort of thing. I mean, obviously not that similar, but the idea of getting that list in place, which is needed, and it not being done for whatever reasons, that could be a similar case where here, if we want a list of areas or a list of homes that have people quarantining, there might be difficulties getting that due to, people's rights and other things. So for me, the easiest thing would be to have a sticker on these doors. But then again, like I say, there are probably a lot of reasons that people will give and resist that.
Yes. And I must say that Jean Scott says that, that someone was taking out the garbage. Even that information, Jean, again, because there are questions around, how did this happen? None of that information was actually provided by government. So I want to be very clear. CMR provided that information to the public through our sources, and thank God for well-placed sources. But government never said even what happened, how people were potentially exposed. They still haven't to this day said any of that. So that is, I think, when people say that they want to hear from the officials, that those are probably the types of things that they are wanting to confirm through official sources. So listen, we give it to you as good as we get it, which is free. And we, tell you that this is not from a government source, but this is from our CMR sources that have provided this information. Now, we have reason to believe that our sources are spot on, and they provided sufficient detailed information, including the fact that some of their coworkers are now in isolation at the government facility because after the guy assisted this gentleman, and of course we want a community of people that assist, but you don't want to then assist someone and put a ton of other people at risk of possible serious health or death because you're trying to help someone else. Like, you've got to make sure that we try to tighten up the protocols. So this person, once again, had no clue what was going on with this individual. So he went back home like nothing was going on and mingled with his housemates and his wife. And now they're all in quarantine. They're all in isolation. They're all in lockdown because of, the situation where he was simply trying to help someone. So don't misunderstand what we're saying. We're not saying that you don't help people in distress. We are just wondering, as is a logical question, how is it that this even happened to begin with? So yes.
Yeah, I mean, you raised a very interesting question about just helping people in need, because then it reminds me that if we're going to reopen, we really need to have that education program go back out to the public, those videos, public meetings, all those things need to happen again before reopening, because people need to know what the symptoms are again. They need to know that if we reopen at a certain date, that they need to, wear their mask, or we need to practice all the things that we were practicing before. But you see, we have become so relaxed that we may just be very casual about some things. So when, before we reopen, we have to, put all these things back in place, make sure all those taxi drivers and people who are front facing with tourists, restaurants and hotels and everywhere else, that all those people are fully trained to detect the symptoms. They know who to call immediately. They know about isolation procedures. So that just triggered what you said about helping people. Just triggered that in my memory, that we do really need to make sure our people are fully aware of what to do when they come across someone who may be expressing symptoms. And I mean, no one should take the chance if they think they have come in contact with someone with symptoms. They should immediately self-isolate as well. But I think one of the issues is for people who have to immediately self-isolate. One of the issues that we saw months ago was there wasn't really a emergency self-isolation package in place where someone could have been in their own business and earning income from their own business. And if they're the only person running that business and they have to self-isolate on an emergency basis, then that person probably wouldn't have a source of income for a certain period of time. And the reason I mention that is, if you don't have a source of income, how do you buy food for your household? How do you keep your family fed? How do you get stuff from the pharmacy? It's just a number of things we have to consider, in relation to emergency self-isolation as well.
Absolutely. So Satchmo Powell says, my experience was great. Got calls and a few unannounced home visits. Can't complain. It was very well planned out for me. And I have to wonder, this makes me think that maybe it just comes down to the individual persons who are actually carrying out their respective duties as part of the Travel Cayman team. So I'm having logs, for example. I know that they have like a particular area that they're assigned. So maybe having logs where you're saying, okay, I checked on this residence and such a time. I'm hoping that all of that is actually in place. Ms. Sue will talk about that here in a second. Elizabeth says, how would that passerby that assisted the man know that it was not a diabetic blackout? Well, that's the problem. He wouldn't know anything about the man at all. But surely there has to be a way. Again, I don't know where that wristband was, but there should have been a way for him to. We're not saying don't help the man. That's perfectly fine. And he would not have known until he rendered assistance. But upon rendering assistance, there should have been some way for him at that point to recognize that this is a quarantined individual. So let me not go home and mingle with my wife and hug the kids and kiss the dog, and then have all those, 5+ people have to go into isolation, some of them co-workers and so on. So he could have contained, had he known at the location, he should have been able to, then realize that, okay, I don't need to then mingle with anybody else. I need to end the contact tracing right here. So one person via WhatsApp says, privacy, doesn't the public need protection? We try to make our neighbors know when rapists and others in our areas. And I consider that we should be given at least a topographical record of the origins and general areas of the affected persons. This will avoid any possible infection. Another person commented there, that's another reason why it's important to let everyone know who's in quarantine. Another person says people are doing quarantine at residence, have wellness calls at least 4 times during a 14-day quarantine. Well, to that person who sent that through, again, there have been people who said that hasn't happened with them. So I don't know how they're falling through the cracks. So Mary says, okay, so someone is being quarantined. The chances are that they can test positive on their last day of being released. So if the HSA is advised a quarantine person is being transmitted to the hospital, knowing the chances of a person being positive, are they not wearing their PPE equipment to receive the person? This is the problem. And I think that what happened here is that not even the staff at the HSA are aware that this was a quarantine approved household. Now, I would think, tell me if I'm being illogical here, folks. I would think that maybe the public wouldn't have it, so you and I wouldn't have it, but emergency personnel, so the HSA, EMT, and police should at the very minimum know what households are currently being used for self-quarantining purposes in case they have to make an emergency call to that household. Heaven forbid that there's a fire. Should fire services not know that this household currently has a person who is in quarantine or family or whatever? Should the EMTs not know that? Should the police not know that in case they have to, say a couple is quarantining together and a domestic incident breaks out and the police have to go to that location? Would they not have the right, and it makes logical sense to me, but I don't think that this is actually happening, that they should know that that house is a quarantine residence? And I think, to answer Mary's question, that is what has happened. They simply didn't know. And it was only afterwards, when the person tests positive, that then they get into ICU, that all of a sudden you've got to quarantine EMTs, the physician that dealt with them, all these other people now have to be put in isolation. Again, we don't have any direct answers. So some of this is certainly speculative. That's just my speculation and probably what occurred. It would be wonderful if we could have a statement that alleviated some of these concerns and answered some of these concerns. What we have coming from public health is, oh, don't worry about it. We've done the contract tracing. And yes, there's some people in isolation and it's all fine. In fact, they didn't even specify, they didn't even specify what exactly, how many people, for example, were actually in isolation as a result of this. That came about as a result of a media question. So just a word to the authorities that are running our country and the civil servants that are running our country. The people don't need to know the personal details of individuals, but what we would like to know is just some additional information to alleviate some of the most often asked questions that people will have. Somebody else says, in relation to this, they need to be honest about this. I know someone who lives around that area that is in quarantine about this. The man who fell off of the British Airways flight and tested positive for COVID. He's currently in the hospital intensive care. So I don't know why they're being so discreet. So, there's someone who now knows that he was on the BA flight. And I had heard that as well. So so this is, one of those things, like I said, if I want to know everything about this man, I would know that. I know he's a Jamaican national. I actually know his name and the whole 9 yards. None of that information in terms of his name and, that sort of thing is necessary. But we do know that he was quarantining alone. And those people, in my mind, present a certain vulnerability that isn't the same when you're quarantining with someone else. So why, for example, if he was highly symptomatic, that means that he was obviously having some respiratory distress at the very minimum. Why didn't he take it upon himself to contact a doctor or the hospital instead of riding out this illness alone? I mean, my God, if you pass out on day 14, he could have, what if he passed out inside of his house? Like, let's just play this out to what could have been a very logical situation. He passed out, say it was early morning, hours before, his test was required. They go through testing everyone else. They can't reach him and they wait until later in the day to reach him. And he passes out and dies from coronary distress from, passing out or whatever. Anything could have happened to him. So I think the individuals who are self-quarantining, they need to understand the risk that comes with quarantining alone with out having somebody else there who can help you make some judgment calls. And so if you're starting to feel ill or you're not feeling well, don't just brush it off. Get some help and say, I'm not feeling well. It doesn't mean that you have COVID or anything else, but you just don't know. And so err on the side of extra caution. This person, Satchmo, says, I sent a message to my neighbors to let them know I'm in quarantine. Didn't want them to think I'm dead since they would not see me for a prolonged period of time. Also, they were helping and directing delivery drivers since I can't meet them at the curb when they struggle to find my apartment as per usual. I think this is fantastic because here's the bottom line. There are a lot of people who feel like, they don't want people to know they're in quarantine. It's not really a big deal, folks. Being in quarantine doesn't mean that you're COVID positive. It's not a big deal. And I think that delivery drivers and others should be aware of the fact that you are in quarantine so that they can take the necessary protective steps. And I think even notifying your neighbors, hey, I'm back from overseas. I'm in quarantine. Don't be running up on my doorstep trying to play dominoes with me tonight or whatever. Depending on the relationship that you have with your neighbors, that's probably a very good idea. So those are some of the concerns I think that have arisen out of that. Someone else was mentioning yesterday about, I think it was in relation to the, oh gosh, what was that? There was a question. I can't remember if it was Carol, but there's some question about the PCR test. So let's talk about some of the regulations now. Alric, this allows us to segue perhaps quite nicely into this topic. The regulations dropped yesterday. I don't know if you guys have seen them. So let me just see if I can actually pull them up on our screen. So we now have the ability to home quarantine if you've been vaccinated for some 5 days instead of 10 or 14 days. So this other person says everyone that visited the garbage collection area over the previous 14 days that the infected person used is now suspicious as well. So, I mean, there are always concerns that they cut off the contact tracing very, very quickly. I've had a lot of people say that to me that, why are you just contact tracing people in the immediate household? Because again, we see how easy it is for one person to come in contact with another person. So I've always had my suspicions about, contact tracing and how it's done. I don't think it's as thorough as it needs to be, but maybe that's just me being, an extra cautious individual. But I think it's a good idea. So let me just see if I have the regulations. I believe I'm supposed to have them here in an email. So, Alric, any general thoughts on the regulations that have now come into force while I actually find them?
Yeah, I'm actually just opening them now. So, one of the things that it talks about is, people who have the vaccination certificate from the HSA or who can be securely verified are required to remain in isolation for a period not less than 5 days. So that's if you have the HSA certificate or if it can be securely verified. And then if it can't be securely verified, then there's a period of 10 days. So that's at a private residence or other place specified by the chief medical officer. So it's very, very interesting. I mean, there's always going to be a group that says quarantine is too long, and then another group that's going to say, because of the risk of someone going from negative to positive during the period, we have to have a longer period. So however you look at it, there are always going to be two sides to the same coin. And as you know, people that are vaccinated can still be positive, can still get COVID. So it's very interesting. I think that perhaps, the government did think about the science that it had received and the medical advice that it had received. And I think that's why they probably went in the direction of, reducing the number of days. And they also probably did that because they realized that there is a plan for reopening that they're doing. And in order to get closer to this plan, they probably thought that, you have to gradually reduce that number of days in quarantine. Otherwise, wouldn't be able to attract people to Cayman. But yeah, did you get a chance to open the regulations?
I can't even find it. Do you have a link that you can send me? I was looking in the emails because I thought maybe when government sent out the latest email about what the changes are, that they would have sent the regulations at the same time, but it looks like they haven't. So I'm just trying to scour online quickly to see if I can find them.
Yeah, I'm actually emailing it to you now so you can open it. And,
okay, great. Thank you. Yes, because that will allow us to have an analysis here and break it down.
So, I mean, in general, I mean, how do you please everyone in terms of, a longer quarantine period or a shorter quarantine period? Like, how do you get to the point where you could sort of make everyone happy?
Well, you can never make everybody happy. I think that's a reality that we all have to accept, especially elected officials. Alric, I still don't have this email. You say you're sending by email?
Yeah, I sent it.
Okay. It hasn't come through yet. So, I'll wait for that to come through.
Yeah.
Still not here yet. Oh, good. A government official is listening to the radio and they're saying, here it is. Thank you so much. I love when you guys listen. I know y'all are always listening and I appreciate when you're proactive and you go, boom, here you go, Sandy. All right. So let's have a look at this, folks. Let me just do a quick screen share so we can all go through the regulations together. So these are the new regulations coming into effect, again, yesterday, passed by Cabinet and gazetted and the whole 9 yards. So Public Health Act 2021. Remember now that all of our laws are now called Act, as we changed, went through that whole sort of parliamentary change last year, where now our legislative assembly is no longer the legislative assembly, it's Parliament, and laws are no longer laws, they're now properly called acts. So there you go. So this is supplement number 1, 22nd of June, 2021. And I believe it actually came into force yesterday. So let's review a couple things here, folks. And again, there's always going to be a section in any piece of act or legislation that has an arrangement, in this case, it's the arrangement of regulations. Sometimes it's like the arrangement of the act and a definition section. Don't be afraid of these things. There's nothing to be afraid of when it comes to the law. Knowledge is power. And so we hope to empower all of you. So some very, very interesting things here. Let's just run through it. So Amendment of Regulation 2 of the Control of COVID-19. We'll talk about that. About definitions, restrictions on arrival of persons who are not vaccinated against the virus, restrictions on arrival of persons who were vaccinated against the virus by the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority, restrictions on arrival of persons who were vaccinated by any other entity other than the HSA, the creation, I guess, or amendment of an offense of providing false medical certificate or false vaccination certificate. That's important, folks, because we know our friends in America are so excited to be able to come to the Cayman Islands and take what they think is a vacation. As we saw earlier in the COVID pandemic, they were all too happy to falsify certificates of PCR tests heading to the Bahamas because they just wanted to go on vacation. So they just got in their computers and made it up. So we can't have that. And we need to be very, very vigilant in terms of that. So I'm glad to see that that's actually an offense. Power to exempt persons from compliance with regulations 3, 4, and 5. And then responsibility for costs associated with isolation or quarantine, and commencement and expiration. So of course, number 8 is a big one, which we will get to here in a second, in that if it's not for essential travel, and we'll see how that perhaps is defined, then you will not be permitted, folks, to have the government pay for it. You will be in a government facility if you can't self-quarantine at home, but you're going to have to do pay for that yourself. So Louis, big shout out to Alric from North Garden in Detroit. He says, thank you for being a logical voice for the people. Keep up the good work. Miss Jennifer's here. She says, I live in a yard with other tenants. Someone was quarantined in one section and we were not given any notice. You see, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about that in my mind is very, very dangerous. So Alric highlights some of the key things here. Isolation for a period of not less than 5 days, where the vaccination certificate is issued by the CIHSA or can be securely verified. And 10 days where the vaccination certificate cannot be securely verified. And I think it's still up to 14 days for certain individuals. So let's just do a quick run through here, folks. Make your notations. So we've now got a 5-day quarantine period for fully vaccinated incoming travelers who meet specific criteria. Okay, so the COVID-19 regulations updated as of Wednesday, the 23rd of June, which was yesterday. Amendment of Regulation 2, the whole definition section. So it talks about principal definition, approved vaccine course. So this is important. That means a vaccination program provided by the HSA, provided by a healthcare facility, and which is approved by the chief medical officer, and any other vaccination program which is approved by the chief medical officer for use against the virus and which is listed in a notice published by the CMO in the Gazette. So in other words, a couple of things that one should glean from this. An approved vaccine course, like say you're coming from China and you're taking one of these knockoff vaccines that we've heard about that really have not proven to be incredibly effective, the CMO is not going to approve that as an approved vaccine course. And so you'll be subject to the usual 14 days quarantine. So, and not every facility in the world can be trusted. So make sure that you're aware of that. You can't just show up with a certificate and be like, yeah, you have to accept this. They've inserted after the definition of the word resident, the following definition: securely verified is now part of the definition section. And it means verified by employing technological solutions of international standards, which are designed to reduce and eliminate fraud, as approved by the chief medical officer. So giving him and his team the discretion to be able to determine what securely verified will mean. Deleting the definition of the words unvaccinated person and substituting the following definition. So they've updated what constitutes an unvaccinated person. So a person who has not at least, a person who has not at least 14 days prior to the person's date of arrival in the Cayman Islands completed an approved vaccine course, or a person who has not completed an approved vaccine course. So basically, they've updated what a vaccinated person is, and by extension now, they've also updated what an unvaccinated person is. Alric, you're the lawyer. I just moonlight as one because I stayed at Holiday Inn last night. So I will allow you to, for the benefit of the layperson, to really break that down in terms of this 14-day requirement prior to arrival, so that we know what unvaccinated, and by the flip side, what vaccinated means.
So first of all, I can't give any legal advice. That's the first thing.
Yeah, all lawyers say that. But break it down for us.
I actually haven't looked at I see that there's a new definition for approved vaccine course. I don't think vaccinated person has actually changed. What has changed is what they're referring to as an unvaccinated person.
Right.
So vaccinated person, from what I can see, has not changed. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't well, unfortunately, I can't see the definition of vaccinated person, so I can't see what.
Right. Okay, let me help you out here, Alric. Right. So this is the requirement. This is a condition. The incoming traveler must have been fully vaccinated by either the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority or some other approved, facility, at least 2 weeks. That's the important thing here, before return arrival to the Cayman Islands. So folks, what that means is if you're coming back to Cayman and you were not, you're vaccinated a week before, 2 days before, you will not be eligible for the 5-day reduction. That's the point that we're trying to pull out here in relation to this whole change of what is an unvaccinated person and what vaccination certificate, whatever. That's the most important thing that you need to understand. You must also demonstrate completion of their vaccination course at least 2 weeks before arrival by real-time logging into the UK National Health Service application and showing this to the Customs and Border Control officer who will be processing your entry. So the NHS application is considered trusted and secure technology. So if you're coming from the UK, you're in a little bit of a better position, perhaps, than some others. And you must, again, demonstrate completion of your vaccination course at least 2 weeks before arrival. And you can do so by a real-time login to the UK National Health Service application. And then this is presented to the Cayman Islands Customs and Border Control. So that will be acceptable. Apparently that's a trusted and secure technology is what they say. Paper documentation from the NHS might be accepted as verifiable evidence if determined valid by the CBC officer processing it. So this, again, is upon entry. I would suggest you do the one that they say is trusted and secure, and don't take your chances, because then this will leave it up to the individual officer upon arrival to determine if they will be accepting your paperwork. And of course, officers are humans, and they may come to a conclusion or decision about your documentation that you do not like, rightfully or wrongfully. Use the most trusted method is what I would suggest, and remove any potential for any disputes or anything like that. Because I know how people get up in arms about these types of things. Oh, you have to take my documentation, blah, blah, blah. Well, the regulations make it quite clear that this is a discretionary right by a CBC officer upon entry, as is most of their duties, searching you for contraband and other things, completely discretionary based on their training. Mm-hmm. All right, so it can be securely verified. If you can't verify it, then you're subject to, according to what section are we on in the regulations? This is section 4, subsection C, C2. 10 days where the vaccination certificate cannot be securely verified at a private residence or such place or facility of quarantine or isolation as specified. Okay. So in subparagraph B, deleted the words upon the person's arrival and substituting prior to leaving any place or facility of quarantine or isolation. So that was in relation to would be, so there've been some changes here.
Where did you get the information about the 2 weeks? Because I only see
about the 14 days. Which
oh yeah,
2 weeks?
Right.
Yeah, so that's 2 weeks. Yeah. You mean for the vaccination proof of?
Yeah, I see it now. I see it now. At least 14 days.
Yes.
Prior to arrival.
Right. We have quarantine period for incoming travelers who are unvaccinated remains at 14 days. Okay, so if you can't verify it, the quarantine period will be 10 days for incoming travelers with a vaccination certificate that cannot be securely verified. So you still get a little bit of a, which is kind of interesting, but you still get a little bit of a benefit of the doubt. But if you've not been vaccinated, it remains at 14 days. And where there are unvaccinated people in the quarantine group, the quarantine period will be 14 days for everyone in that group. So say, for example, you're traveling as a family and you've got a young child who cannot be vaccinated. Because of that, you will be subjected to the 14-day vaccination period. Or you have an elderly person or someone with a special condition who has not been able to be vaccinated as part of your group, everyone will have to be quarantined for 14 days. Let me just see what other major points we have. All right. So there are additional changes about testing procedures. So we're going to get to the payment here in a second, but testing procedures, basically now where they were testing at the airport, because remember they changed it where you didn't have to do the 72 hours of PCR tests in advance. You could do it at the airport, then and go into isolation. That is now changing again. So it's now reverting back to where it was. So under the new regulations, the pre-arrival PCR test is being reintroduced for all travelers who must provide a negative result within 72 hours of travel to the Cayman Islands. So let me be very clear about what this means. I've had people who had to go away for medical, friends went away for medical reasons, and then they forgot, documentation or whatever in relation to the PCR test. When they got to the Miami airport now has a facility whereby you can actually get vaccinated or get tested, PCR tested right there. You're not going to be able to use that if you're planning on jumping on that flight and coming to Grand Cayman, because there's now the 72-hour requirement that you do it 72 hours before travel. So folks, I'm in agreement with Irvlin. Irvlin says, I will not be traveling anytime soon. Neither will I if I can help it, unless it is a medical emergency, because I got to be honest with you. There's a lot of things here that you have to be very cognizant of. This is not the time, good folks, to take a vacation. Our borders are still quote unquote repatriation flights only. Yes, we do have flights available to and from Miami, the UK, Jamaica, Honduras, and other places, but be mindful of the reason why you're traveling, because it's not open door policy, free for all, go take a holiday and then come back sort of thing. So PCR test 72 hours beforehand. On arrival, swabbing for PCR tests at the Owen Roberts International Airport is no longer required, but you must have that negative PCR test result beforehand, the 72 hours, and then you'll be subjected to one at the end of your quarantine period before you can be released as well. Let me just see here now. And I think the logic behind that was explained at the press conference, which makes total sense, is that they want to, especially with this new Delta variant, which is raging all over the place, they want to really test people beforehand before you even come on this island, because they're doing their best to try to control the flow of that variant as much as possible. But you know what they've said, folks, by August, the United States of America is expecting the Delta variant to be the dominant variant by late August. And even in the in the EU, the European Union, they have said that the Delta variant will most likely make up 90%. What? 90%, folks, of EU cases by late August. And that's what they are predicting. Wow. What a mess. Okay, so there is that. So mandatory swabbing, yes, introduce. Okay, so if you are an unvaccinated frontline worker, and that will be defined as, I guess, the chief medical officer sees fit, but it will include port employees and others dealing with travelers. You will be subject to a mandatory nasal pharyngeal swabbing for PCR testing on a weekly basis. Well, that's got to be unpleasant, but that's what it's going to be if you're unvaccinated. So the choice is yours. Get vaccinated or be subjected to that weekly test. As of the 1st of July, so this is now payment for place or facility of quarantine isolation. This is section, so it's repealing Regulation 10 and substitution responsibility for costs associated with isolation of quarantine. Basically, the gist of this part now is that as of July the 1st, government will no longer cover the cost of quarantine in government-sponsored quarantine facilities for non-essential travel for returning Caymanians and residents. Proof that travel was for essential purposes will be required, in order to have costs waived. The details of what is considered to be essential travel will be listed on the Cayman travel website, which is explore.gov.ky/travel. So a lot of people were, messaging like, well, if I go and I do this, and if I do that, is that considered essential travel? Go to that website, folks, and they will tell you there what is considered essential travel. But we know the things that are not, shopping trip to Miami is certainly not essential travel. The interesting thing really about this is, Alric, we had been receiving a number of complaints that people were taking advantage of the situation. So in other words, they were traveling really for leisure and expecting government to foot the bill. And I think the government recognized that by reducing it to 5 days for vaccinated persons, that the likelihood of someone abusing that even further is a lot greater, because, you might not get, depends on your vacation, obviously, but you might not get enough time to sit in quarantine for 14 days. But quarantine for 5 days isn't too bad if you've been vaccinated. And hey, I go to Disney World, I take an Orlando vacation, a little trip with the family during the summer, and I come back and stay at the Holiday Inn. That's another mini vacation in the Holiday Inn room for 5 days, and I'm going to expect government to pay for it. So government has said, no, we won't be doing that. Satchmo has a good question. Isn't the 72 hours a minimum so that you can still do it beforehand? I don't think that's how it works, actually. I think it's a requirement that it's done 72 hours before, because you wouldn't want it too early. Because, again, if I do it a week out, that means that I could have contacted it in that space of time, and that wouldn't make sense. I think the 72 hours is when it says within 72 hours, they mean within 72 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do the test more than 72 hours before.
Nope. Right. So you're going to have to pay for your own quarantine if it's not for essential travel as of July the 1st. Let me just see what else is coming out of this. I think those are the major bits and pieces. So we'll post this up on our website. Frontline workers will be defined in a list provided by the medical officer of health and will include all of those working directly with travelers, such as Customs and Borders Control, airline staff, Owen Roberts International Airport and other port workers elsewhere, port security staff, travel command customer-facing operatives, and those assisting with compliance, staff working government quarantine facilities, including the cleaners, and those providing transport. So all of the buses in that pool, the taxis and so on, that have been providing transport to the private homes. If you choose not to get vaccinated, you will be subjected to this very regular PCR test. And again,
maybe you can get the chief medical officer on your show.
We've been waiting on that department to figure that out for a minute now. I'll follow up with them again.
They should know the benefits of being on CMR, you know?
Well, we've been, listen, anyway.
But that'd be good.
Let's just say that we have extended the invitation and we are waiting on the people that we extended it to. They're waiting on their supervisors to arrange it. But yes, we're still waiting.
That'd be good because it's hard for people to receive, regulations like you just put on the screen, and those regulations refer to previous regulations, and it'll be great if someone could come on, like the chief medical officer or someone else, to really go into what the changes really mean, because not everyone is going to understand the details of the changes. This is why, again, I say before we reopen, we have to be in a position where people are properly educated about what they're supposed to be doing and also what the rules are. Because I know people, that have been stopped by the police, for example, for certain things, and the person that they stopped actually knew the law. So the person that they stopped could actually quote the law to the police. And so I think I say that to say that sometimes even the person that's carrying out the function, in the public, sometimes isn't fully aware of a recent change in the law. So I think it's very important for someone from the government to come out each time these regulations are printed. When I say come out, I mean almost immediately, because some of these things are going into effect immediately, and some other parts are going into effect on 1st of July. So how do people know those differences, right? So and how do people know these new definitions that you talk about in these regulations? How would they know, right? So CMR is just trying to increase the awareness of people. And, I can't give legal advice. So all you're trying to do is increase awareness when the thing happens, because that's what CMR does, right? When it happens, then everyone else knows. And I think that's great. But I think the chief medical officer has to be willing to come on your show too and give a little feedback on what do the detailed changes mean, what do you have to do differently now, what other things you have to bear in mind. One of the things that I thought of was instead of these vaccination certificates, I mean, if you're going to travel, right, all of us have to go through immigration. So if people consent to immigration having their information, then there wouldn't be any real need to have the certificate. And, there wouldn't be this idea of fraud because, someone comes in with a certificate and then you have to verify it. If it's not from the HSA, you have to verify it. So instead of going through all that process, why isn't information, if people consent to it, why isn't it just shared immigration to immigration and then you have it resolved?
Yeah, makes sense. Let me just see here, Alric. So yes, oh shoot, my apologies. I'm like responding to someone here and forgetting my share screen is still on. Right. So someone did mention, so yes, most of the regulations do come into effect yesterday, which was June the 23rd. Regulation 8, which deals with paying for your own quarantine in a government facility if it's for non-essential travel, comes into force on July the 1st, just to give people time. I guess if you've been in the middle of traveling and you hadn't planned for that, government is going to give you a little bit of time to get yourself sorted out. So that's another week from today's date. So Tcht Pao says that Dr. Lee actually lives on his road, so he will extend the invitation when he sees him walking this evening. Yes, we know he likes to exercise, so do tell him he knows how to find us. Mason confirms that yes, it's 72 is the maximum 72 hours. Anytime between pre-flight and 72 hours is required for the PCR test to be accepted. So yes. Maria, good morning. All right, folks, that's our program for today. Senor Alric, thank you so much for coming on the show with us. You guys can find Alric here at least once a week. And he does often join in when he's listening to the conversations as well. I took note of your comments yesterday about Caymanians in tourism. We will continue to have that conversation, not just in tourism, but Caymanian employment woes across all sorts of industries. I think a lot of the issues are certainly, financial services everywhere. But I do know that the more that we talk about this, hopefully the more we can find some viable solutions. And we acknowledge our shortcomings as Caymanians, the things that we need to do, the things that we need to fix. And we also acknowledge that a lot of our employers also have shortcomings, especially in relation to how they treat Caymanians. So we will continue to have those conversations. I recently had someone stop me and say, thank you so much. Your recent reporting on FCIB, which had let go a number of Caymanian staff. Some had been there for, oh my gosh, a lifetime as it relates to employment, 30 plus years, their entire careers. And the person said, thank you for doing that, because the powers that be in that organization are now on their P's and Q's. The CMR knows what they're doing, and we are keeping a very close eye on them, and they don't want any additional exposure for letting people go, and more importantly, for doing it in a manner that leads to a lot of questions. No notice, telling people just to pack their bags after they've been there for like 30 years and they haven't done anything wrong. If you're going to make people redundant, try to make them redundant with some decency. I mean, come on, organizations, you guys can do better. So Alec just confirms, as all lawyers do, don't take what he says as legal advice, because he don't want you to be suing him like, well, Alec gave me this legal advice on the radio, him and CMR. I'm not a lawyer. Alec is a lawyer, although you don't really practice, right? I mean, you're still a lawyer. You do corporate stuff.
Yeah, I'm not actually currently practicing. So what I'm waiting for is for our case to be heard in court and not to be resolved. So, it's very difficult, so it's better to avoid any issues. So I'm not currently practicing at all.
Okay. So Alec has a little situation where him and other Caymanian attorneys are actually suing the Caymans government. Yeah. We've talked about it before, but I think most of you probably forgotten. We might have to revisit that soon, Alric. Yeah, do you have a date yet for? Is it moving forward? Where is it?
So the issue is that we have senior counsel from overseas who is very well known in this area. Unfortunately, we had to wait over a month to get him admitted to Cayman. We don't know why there was such a long delay in getting him admitted. But the issue is that now the court is going ahead with his admission, but the work permit that we got for him is now expired. So it's because it took so long for him to get admitted, his permit expired. So now we have to go and apply for a new permit. So it's you have to go through the process.
Yeah.
And once we get a new permit, and then hopefully they will process his actual admission. So it is going forward. So
you're bringing out the big guns to argue your case, is what you're saying. Is this person a QC or?
So he's not actually a QC, but he is a person who's argued the same situation in other jurisdictions, and he is not just an academic. He is a litigator, so he is referred to in various cases. So a very, very competent person. Is just it should be a no-brainer to admit that person, but for whatever reason there was a delay, and because of that delay, now the permit is expired. So we just have to go through the process. So just waiting for that whole process to start once the permit is renewed.
All right. Well, Alec will certainly keep us updated here. Luis says, thank you, Sandy, and everyone in the program. Love to come back and visit soon. So again, listening to us all the way from Australia, from Sydney, Australia this morning. All right, good folks. That's all I've got for you. What I will do now is I'm actually going to, instead of ending the show and then restarting a new stream, should I pull in the symposium or do it as a separate thing? What do you think, Alec? Maybe I'll do it as a separate. So I will end the show. And then immediately after ending the show, I'm going to start the symposium so that you guys can log in for that. Please tune in, especially if you're not there in person, obviously. This is the Roy Bodden Symposium that, again, is being held at the Hartwell Theatre. And it's going to have a lot of international scholars and academics presenting their own interpretation and critical issues in the writings of Mr. J. A. Roy Bodden, Caymanian educator, historian, author, and artist. So tune in for that. We've had last week and this week some contributors from the symposium who've joined us on the show. And it's been very, very interesting to hear exactly what they're going to be focused on. So Alec, you have yourself a good weekend. Be safe, and we'll see you again next week.
All right. See you soon.
All right, folks, we will go ahead and, like I said, end this live stream. And then after that, we'll start a new stream so you can enjoy the symposium throughout the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Cold Hard Truth. Make sure to check Facebook for showtimes and more information and the latest news at CaymanMarlRoad.com. Subscribe to our IG and Facebook pages to get the latest happenings.